Before we begin, let me tell you this video isn't for everyone. No flashy edits, no hyper-stimulated nonsense, just actual ideas. Only 30% of viewers make it to the end because this isn't brain rot. If you do, you're part of a rare few in today's short attention span wasteland. You think deeper, you focus, you're probably going to do great things. Now, if you want to support content that respects your brain, try Audible free for 30 days using my link in the description, or use my affiliate link when you buy a book. It costs you nothing but helps a lot. Let's get started.
Alexander Karp and Nicholas Zamiska, the CEO and head of corporate affairs at Palantir Technologies, are two of American tech's leading voices. So when they say that Silicon Valley has lost its way, it's worth paying attention. Big tech, they charge, has wasted the talents of its brightest and best on meaningless trivialities. Instead of addressing real challenges, Silicon Valley's top engineers have been developing phone games, building food delivery apps, and eroding the attention spans and civic spirit of screen-addicted Americans. All of this would be bad enough in times of peace, Karp and Zamiska note, pointing to the long peace dividend that followed the end of the Cold War. But those days are long over. Today, a bloc of authoritarian states is not only asserting itself in Ukraine, the Middle East, and Taiwan, it's also racing to develop AI-enabled weapons that could tip the balance of global power. All the while, Silicon Valley remains fixated on photo filters and ad algorithms. So what's to be done? Karp and Zamiska call for a revival of the kind of public-private collaboration that once fueled Western innovation and dominance. America is in an undeclared state of emergency. There's a long-standing philosophical idea that history is shaped by a conflict between competing visions of the good life, and how best to organise society to achieve it. Every major ideology offers its own answer, from slave societies and feudal theocracies to capitalist democracies and communist dictatorships. History, philosophical partisans of this idea suggest, continues as long as that question remains open. It was this framing that the political scientist Francis Fukuyama had in mind when he declared the end of history in the summer of 1989. Preempting the final collapse of Soviet communism a few years later, he argued that humanity had reached an ideological terminus. The life and death struggle between contending visions of how to organize human life was over. The West's model, the open society plus free markets, was being universalized. But as Fukuyama later admitted, that conclusion was premature. A quarter century after his essay, a powerful bloc of anti-democratic states had begun to assert itself. Russia's annexation of Crimea and later invasion of Ukraine, Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, and China's militarization of the South China Sea marked the collapse of the post-Cold War peace dividend. As Russian forces stormed into Kyiv, Fukuyama grimly declared the end of history. Can the West also win this next chapter of ideological conflict? The early signs are not encouraging. While NATO managed to prevent Ukraine's outright defeat, it hasn't come close to producing enough of the hardware its ally needs to win. And according to many experts, the issue isn't a lack of political will or resources, it's production. In a shooting war with a peer adversary like China, they suggest that the United States will run out of artillery and tank shells within weeks, if not days. America, in other words, lacks the industrial base to produce the necessities of today's wars, let alone tomorrow's. Given the vast sums spent on defense every year in the United States, it's reasonable to ask what went wrong. The simple answer is consolidation. During the Cold War, there were more than 50 major suppliers of goods and services to the Department of Defense. Today, there are 5. In contrast to the dual-purpose industrial giants of the 20th century, companies like Ford that served both the military and the civilian economy, today's contractors operate within a command and control model that favours predictability over innovation. Paired with feel-good optimism about the triumph over communism, consolidation bred a culture of complacency. The result? The United States now finds itself in an undeclared state of emergency, one for which it is dangerously underprepared. Hard power will be built on software in the 21st century. In 1942, J. Robert Oppenheimer was appointed to lead Project Y, an ultra-secretive project to develop an atom bomb. He would spend the next 3 years in the New Mexico desert working on the most destructive weapon in human history. When you see something that's technically sweet, Oppenheimer told the government agents who vetted him for his security clearance, you go ahead and do it. In other words, build the damn thing and figure out what you're going to do with it later. That, he said, was how it was with the atom bomb. Oppenheimer changed his mind after his invention's use on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the summer of 1945. Project Y's scientists, he said, had known sin. They couldn't shake this knowledge. There was no way back. But what was the alternative? As a 1939 letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, signed by Albert Einstein and other scientists, noted, Nazi Germany had already begun research into the construction of such a weapon. That someone was going to build this terrible, technically sweet thing was certain. The only question was who'd do it first. We now stand at a new technological crossroads. As the atomic age fades into the past, it's artificial intelligence, not A-bombs, that will shape the course of international politics in this century. As a result, military technology and strategy will need to be reimagined from the ground up. Take just one example: the F-35 fighter jet. Conceived in the mid-1990s, it was scheduled to remain the flagship attack aircraft of the United States and its allies for some 70 years. That, though, was before large language models began demonstrating what some researchers call the sparks of artificial general intelligence, an intelligence which matches or exceeds our own. What role are manned aircraft likely to play in winning the battle for the skies in 2088? As the retired United States General Mark A. Milley points out, that's a question the planners who invested over $2 trillion in the design and construction of the F-35 will have to answer. As in 1939, we know that a new generation of ultra-lethal weapons is coming. The question is, who gets there first? America's adversaries are unlikely to waste much time debating ethical niceties or the potential dangers of AI-enabled targeting systems, drones, and missiles. The West must decide if it would rather beat them to the punch or get bogged down in philosophical pondering. The United States has been a technological republic since its founding. Who's going to build the software upon which America's hard power will depend in the 21st century? There's a tried and true answer to that question: an alliance of scientists, technicians, engineers, and Uncle Sam himself. It was that union, after all, which laid the foundations for Silicon Valley's very own era-defining products and services. Take just two major breakthroughs: GPS and the Internet. Both were bankrolled by the Department of Defense, designed for military applications and only later opened up for civilian use. Both transformed our world. Without GPS, the fitness trackers on our wrists, the maps on our phones, and the automated tractors ploughing American fields would be useless. Without the Internet, much of what we take for granted in our world simply wouldn't exist. Competition with the Soviets spurred innovation, but the entanglement of science and state isn't a Cold War relic. In fact, it goes back to the nation's earliest days. There were tinkerers as well as thinkers among the founding fathers. Jefferson designed sundials and conducted botanical experiments on his farm. Benjamin Franklin was responsible for an endless series of inventions, including the lightning rod, a revolutionary stove design, and bifocal glasses. Early leaders of this technological republic took an interest in scientific questions even if they weren't practitioners, like Jefferson and Franklin. John Adams, the second president of the United States, disliked unprofitable science geared to what he called objects of vain curiosity. He hoped that his administration would be remembered for having channeled scientific efforts into more profitable pursuits, above all, the promotion of agriculture. The relationship between politicians, scientists, and technical specialists remained close through the centuries. When the Soviets launched their Sputnik satellite in October 1957, President Dwight D. Eisenhower immediately called his top scientific advisor to the White House. A plan was in place to revitalize America's flagging space program within an hour. NASA, the agency that would land a man on the moon just over a decade later, was the result of that meeting. This relationship, which fostered innovation while securing the national interest, has broken down, and the timing couldn't be worse. Facing a new Oppenheimer moment, America needs its scientists more than it has for some time. As we'll see, the problem isn't a shortage of gifted contemporary Oppenheimers. It's their reluctance to work for the government. Silicon Valley is more comfortable building food delivery apps than it is serving America. The Swedish chemist and engineer Alfred Nobel found something technically sweet: a safer, more stable form of nitroglycerin, a notoriously volatile explosive. He called it dynamite, a reference to the Greek word for power. He hoped it would make mining and construction safer. The governments who became his most loyal customers prized its ability to efficiently eliminate human life on the battlefield. Realizing he was going to go down in history as a merchant of death, Nobel reinvented himself as a prize-bestowing humanist. What's usually forgotten in the telling of this story is Nobel's idea that the sheer destructiveness of his invention might prove a blessing in disguise. The only thing that prevents nations going to war, he said, is terror. Nobel's comment anticipated the strategic doctrine of the United States in the 20th century. As the game theorist Thomas Schelling said, the power to hurt is bargaining power. To exploit that power is diplomacy. It may be vicious diplomacy, but it's diplomacy nonetheless. Put differently, the unprecedented peacefulness of the post-war order has a simple explanation. America's possession of weapons made it a terrifying potential destroyer of worlds. As we've seen in the 21st century, it's software, not steel, that will determine a state's power to hurt. Yet, while America's adversaries push forward in developing AI-enabled weapons, military projects remain largely taboo in Silicon Valley. Engineers at California's top tech firms are eager to design algorithms that optimize ad placements or boost user engagement, but far more hesitant when it comes to building tools that could give the US military an edge in the AI arms race. The tension came to a head in 2017 when Google signed a Department of Defense contract to help develop a system for planning and executing special forces operations. The backlash was swift. In an open letter to the company's CEO, employees wrote, "Building this technology to assist the US government in military surveillance and potentially lethal outcomes is not acceptable." A similar story unfolded when Microsoft took on an American Army contract in 2019. As Microsoft employees put it, "We didn't sign up to develop weapons." Microsoft and Google might refuse to build weapons, but their Chinese counterparts won't. Which brings us back to Nobel's overlooked insight. If Silicon Valley truly values peace, it must be willing to help America win the race for AI. America needs a sense of purpose to win the new Cold War. What is a nation? In 1882, French philosopher Ernest Renan offered a now famous answer to that deceptively simple question during a lecture at the Sorbonne in Paris. A nation, he argued, cannot be defined by race, ethnicity, or even language. What truly binds a nation together, he said, is a vast solidarity between past and future, a shared belief that the sacrifices made for the common good both before and ahead are meaningful and justified. A nation is not a fixed entity. It lives, or dies, through the daily renewal of this collective spirit. In Renan's words, a nation is nothing less than a daily plebiscite. If enough of us are to vote yes to a universal goal, we need common stories and myths. For several centuries, American exceptionalism provided that commonality. It didn't matter where your grandparents came from or what god you worshipped, or didn't. You were an American, which is to say a free citizen of a nation that stood tall and saw further into the future than other countries. This story gave shape to an idea about the good life that hundreds of millions of Americans could agree upon, even as they squabbled about pretty much everything else. These kinds of strong beliefs went out of fashion at some point in the late 20th century. They were replaced by a well-meaning relativism that looked for merit in every kind of living, and in the end gave up on moral north and south entirely. The safest policy many citizens found was to say nothing about truth, beauty, and the good life at all. As belief in American exceptionalism faded, people searched for meaning elsewhere. Increasingly, they found it in the glossy, hyper-personalized world of consumerism, particularly the version conjured by Silicon Valley. Which brings us to a key insight. America's foreign policy cannot be separated from its domestic story. If the United States hopes to prevail against its global adversaries in the 21st century, it must rekindle the shared identity, purpose, and sense of national solidarity that once animated it. And in a world increasingly shaped by technology, Silicon Valley shouldn't just answer that call. It should be leading the charge.